This is my life, call it Chronicles, but you only see half. Monocle, might have to take a little break if the chronic calls, and I'm the best of both worlds, Sonic and Knuckles.
What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from SVMTG down there on the youtube.com. We do decks. Here's one right here, actually. I've been talking about this one for a while here. We're going to do the Crawling Sensation deck, and this one we're going to make a double deck out of. I think there's a super fun, like $10 build available to us right now, and there's a actually seriously really competitive one too, so let's take a look at both. As usual, budget deck first, and then we'll go from there, build on that. This is going to be mono green Crawling Sensation. I know I just did mono green triple tech. Let's call this an addendum to that. But there is, we can build this for like 10 bucks. Super duper cheap on tcgplayer.com right now. And some good pieces too that seem mint specifically so this deck can exist. First of all, the main thing in the deck. We'll talk about Crawling Sensation for a second. Interesting card. From the first time I read it, I was like, let's try and do something with this. And it turns out that incremental advantage with this over the course of a few turns is great, especially when you have more than one copy out. This card is fantastic in multiples. And yes, the worst part about it is that you only get one insect per turn per Crawling Sensation. The first time a land goes to your graveyard every turn, you get a 1/1 insect. This can lead to, especially again with multiple copies of these out, can lead to pretty big armies over the course of just 2 or 3 turns. Now, one thing I want to point out about Crawling Sensation before I move on here is that it's once per turn, but you can do this on your opponent's turn too. And we have a couple of ways of doing it in the deck, not too many, and a lot of them are in the land base itself. You can pop an Evolving Wilds on your opponent's turn and get a 1/1 insect. And to make this work, we have to have a bunch of pieces that dump lands into our graveyard and a bunch of pieces that get lands out of our graveyard so we can actually use our lands. That's important in Magic. Sort of one of the most important things. So we've got a lot of stuff in the format that does actually both of those things. Again, it seems like this deck was sort of meant to exist. Let's start with the stuff that dumps cards into our graveyard, and the most important thing in the budget deck is Pack Guardian. It doesn't quite make it in to the competitive deck. It's just not on quite that level, but in the budget deck, it is an all-star, Even without a Crawling Sensation out, this can create, 6 power among 2 creatures for just the 4 mana. With the Crawling Sensation out, that is 7 power among 3 creatures. That's really, really good. And it's the only thing in the deck that allows us to actually just straight up discard lands from our hand. We've got a lot of ways of getting the lands into the graveyard. This is the only thing that allows us to dump excess lands from our hand. We've got a couple of different things that work with it, and I'll talk about them as we go on here. But just know that in the budget deck, Pack Guardian is actually sometimes a solid win condition because it creates a fair board state just by itself. We're also playing a bunch of spells that put lands into our graveyard. That's important. And all these spells will do other stuff for us too, so that's cool. And I'll talk about all 3 of them right now. We're playing 4 copies of Vessel of Nascency, 3 copies of Gather the Pack, and then 4 copies of Fork in the Road. Fork in the Road is actually really good in the competitive deck, allowing us to play multiple colors for fairly cheap without having to make the mana base too crazy, because Fork in the Road can go and get any source that we need at that time. In this deck, obviously, it can just go get Forest for you, but that's still okay, because it ensures that you'll get a land on your 3rd turn. If you play it on turn 2, that can allow us to play Crawling Sensation. Obviously, that can get us to Crawling Sensation. So smoothing out your land drops isn't bad, and obviously dumping a land into your graveyard is good if you've already got a Sensation out. Vessel, though, fantastic. This is one of my favorite pieces in the deck, and it does make it into the competitive deck because it can not only find enchantments like Crawling Sensation and another enchantment that we're playing, but it can also find any of the creatures that we're playing. And obviously, too, sometimes it can put a land into your hand if you need one. It can put a land in your hand for Pack Guardian, for instance. So lots of good things that Vessel does, and as far as, not only dumping lands into our graveyard with Vessel, but also finding lands we need them, finding creatures, and finding key enchantments. So Vessel is a very important card in the deck. And then Gather the Pack was a 4 of. We've cut it down to 3. It can sometimes find as much as 2 creatures for us, yes, and it does dump lands into the graveyard. But of these 3 pieces here, I do think it's the least important, but I still want to play 3. It is still pretty darn good. As I mentioned, we also have to play cards that get lands out of our graveyard because we want to play our lands. Again, that's super important that we do that in a game of Magic the Gathering. And here's the things that recover lands from our graveyard. We're playing 4 copies of Groundskeeper, 4 copies of Stoic Builder, and then 4 copies of Pulse of Murasa in the deck. Pulse of Murasa is super awesome against aggro decks, which we are good against if we get set up. Obviously, we create chump blockers like it's nobody's business if we can get set up, but that's sometimes an issue. So a thing like Pulse of Murasa can get us right back in the game. It can also get lands that we've dumped into our graveyard. That's cool. We can do Pulse of Murasa, get a land back, and the next turn play a Pack Guardian. That's pretty cool. But mostly it's also going to get creatures that we've dumped into our graveyard without necessarily wanting to. that can happen too. So a lot of things about Pulse of Murasa good, just an all-around good sort of cleanup card that gets us back into the game life-wise against aggro. Groundskeeper, the incredibly important key card. This is going to be sort of the #1 engine in the deck for getting lands back into our hand that we've dumped, and then playing them onto the battlefield. So, and also again good with Pack Guardian. So there's that. You can always have a land to dump the Pack Guardian with the Groundskeeper. Groundskeeper is actually even more important in the competitive deck. He made it in there for a very specific reason. But Groundskeeper obviously is sort of the main and very obvious engine for land recursion in this deck. And the Stoic Builder is sort of a one-shot Groundskeeper that's a little bigger, and that's good too. I do like an interesting synergy with Fork in the Road. It's not the best turn sequence, but it feels powerful. Is second turn Fork in the Road, third turn Stoic Builder, and get back the land that you dumped into your graveyard. That's not bad at all, and Stoic Builder is a 2/3, which is a decent body in the sort of early to mid-game. We'll finish off the creatures here by talking about another big win condition, other than just Crawling Sensation and sort of creature damage. This is Ulvenwald Hydra, and I know this is creature damage, but this thing can get enormous over the course of the game. We're not really doing anything other than playing the lands that we're getting back from our graveyard with all these recovery, sort of land recovery cards. But with Ulvenwald Hydra, we can put those lands to really good work, making the Hydra huge, helping us cast him in the first place. That's good, you know. He searches up a land when he comes into play. That can be pretty important, you know. So lots of things about Ulvenwald Hydra are good. Just the fact that he's a big, stupid, meaty, dumb creature, you know, that's going to sometimes win us the game because he can get enormous in this deck. We're going to be coming across a lot of lands. We have many ways to get them from to our graveyard and then back to our hand and then into play. So we're going to be pretty consistent in our land drops here in this deck all throughout the game if we want to be, making our Ulvenwald Hydra as big as like a 12/12 sometimes if we go that late into the game. And Crawling Sensation helps us go that late into the game. If we can just get like one insect a turn, which is not as hard as you think it might be. We got a lot of stuff to dump into the graveyard here, lands. And then we've also got, you know, Crawling Sensation itself helps us dump lands into the graveyard. And we can, again, a lot of ways of getting them back. So Ulvenwald Hydra can be very huge over the course of the game and help thin our deck, get a piece that we need when he comes into play. Just perfect and relatively cheap sort of alternate big creature win condition in the deck. And the last card in the deck we're going to play in the main, at least, is Evolutionary Leap at a 2 of. This was a 1 of, and, you know, Gather the Pack was a 4 of. I fudged the numbers there. Gather the Pack down to a 3, this up to a 2, because it's fairly important. In most decks that play Leap in the format, just play the 1 copy. But in this deck, I liked it so much, you know, we make Leap fodder with Crawling Sensation every turn. And it's a way to get some extra mileage out of Sensation. So, you know, we can always just make a 1/1 during our turn, and then sack it to Evolutionary Leap and go get a creature that is going to be better no matter what. You know, Groundskeeper is the worst thing we can hit, but that's still technically better than a 1/1 insect, right? So I really do like a lot about Leap, and it also does a lot of good work in the competitive deck. We're playing 25 lands in the deck, and a lot of them have the ability to go to the graveyard. And I'd like to push this even further. We could play things like Spawning Bed, maybe Foundry of the Consoles. But all of these do fair amounts of work, and like I said earlier, you can always pop any of these on your opponent's turn and get an insect off of Crawling Sensation, so that's good too. Here's the sideboard in the deck. Fairly standard green sideboard, you know. We've got ways of producing colorless mana, 8 of them to be exact, so I felt like Warping Wail was a good choice for the board, but other than that, pretty typical green sideboard. You know, we've got ways of taking out Planeswalkers and Enchantments in Display of Dominance, and we've got ways of taking out creatures in things like Clipwings and Plummet. But that's pretty much all there is to it. Green sideboards are fairly easy to configure nowadays. And here's the power rankings for the budget deck. A final score of 53, which isn't terrible considering it's about $10. We just did $5 Graceblade Artisan, and that was like a 46. That was a really low score. This is a lot better than that, at least, and it's only going to cost you twice as much, a whole $10. You know, it's going to cost you dinner to build this deck. Don't go without eating. Just save $10 and also eat, and then build this deck. Also, all these pieces, a lot of them will go in the more expensive. I call it a competitive deck, but I haven't told you yet. The competitive deck is going to cost you all of $60. Still fairly cheap. So you can go ahead and build this and sort of start working towards the competitive deck. You really don't have that long to go. On to the competitive deck, though. Again, this deck is only about $60, and it's fairly competitive, and it's got a pretty high score for a deck that only costs $60. But we'll get to that in just a moment here. How have we changed things? Well, this deck is Jund. We're playing 3 whole colors in this deck. And things like Fork in the Road will help with that. You know, there's other ways of getting your multiple colors of mana for pretty cheap right now, at least in this deck. So don't worry about that. But we're still playing 4 copies, obviously, of Crawling Sensation. It's still technically a Crawling Sensation deck, but we're doing something really different in this one. But Crawling Sensation is still just as good and even better than it is in the budget deck because we have more ways of getting an insect at instant speed on their turn, which is always very important, especially if we can do it at essentially instant speed. So Crawling Sensation even better in this deck, and it's got more and more important ways of letting you get that insect. The number one addition to the deck, and one of only 2 red cards in the entire deck, is Molten Vortex, which we're playing as a 4 of. It was a 3 of. I didn't think it'd be, we can find Molten Vortex, right? But we can. We've got Vessel of Nascency and stuff, but I wanted to see it so much that it became a playset, It is pretty much one of the main win conditions in the deck other than Crawling Sensation. Put your opponent on a clock and functions as good removal, which a deck like this obviously needs. All the cards that we have in the deck that make Crawling Sensation better by getting cards back, lands back from the graveyard to our hand, we can then discard again. Make this card even better, get lands back from your graveyard, discard into Molten Vortex, get a 1/1 bug, All of that's awesome. The cards work so well together. And Molten Vortex was just an absolute perfect addition to this deck, It sort of makes it more of a Molten Vortex deck and not a Crawling Sensation deck, because you can win without Crawling Sensation. And again, all those cards that get lands back from the graveyard are, made much better by the presence of a Molten Vortex. But with the Crawling Sensation out, it makes, again, the card even better. Let's go over some of the stuff that's in the budget deck that also made it to this deck. This suite of 3 cards was so important in the budget deck that it really earned its place in this one. There's 4 copies of Vessel of Nascency, already pointed that out. 4 copies of Fork in the Road, which again is even better in this deck. And then 4 copies of Pulse of Murasa. Pulse of Murasa, again, so good against certain decks that we needed it. And as a way to get creatures back that we've dumped in, lands back that we've dumped in, just everything about Pulse is an absolute yes. Same thing with Fork in the Road. Again, it makes us more able to play 3 different colors for a much less of a cost, And then Vessel of Nascency, just an all-star, goes and finds pretty much everything in the top 5 at least. Finds anything that we could possibly want at the time. Lands, creatures, enchantments, it's all good. And then dumps any excess lands into our graveyard to help with Crawling Sensation. We're also keeping Evolutionary Leap, like I mentioned, but just as a 1-of in this deck. You can go and search up, just sacrifice a bug and then find, the first creature that you hit. And in this deck, we're playing fewer creatures. There's 9 creatures in this deck, but that actually makes it a little more important to find the creatures that we do have. And the last spell I'll talk about here is 4 copies of Magmatic Insight, the second red card of 2 red cards in the entire deck. This is obviously fan-freaking-tastic, with Crawling Sensation. Again, we'll discard the land, get an insect, and then draw 2 cards. So this is also pretty good with another card that we're running, a creature that we're running in the deck. So there's that synergy too. I'll get to that when we talk about the creature in just a second here. But obviously, Magmatic Insight, if we have access to red, it's gonna be good in a Crawling Sensation deck. Turns out we have access to red. Let's play a full playset. Let's get to those creatures though. We're playing 9 of them in all and 3 creatures in total. We're playing 4 copies of Groundskeeper, just like the budget deck. We're playing 3 copies of Tireless Tracker and then 2 copies of the Gitrog Monster. Gitrog Monster, just perfect thing in this deck for both Molten Vortex and Crawling Sensation. Works well with both of those, and the Magmatic Insight that we're playing. Fork in the Road works well with this card. Just everything looks so great with the Gitrog Monster out, drawing you that extra card. And Gitrog Monster takes the place of Ulvenwald Hydra in this deck, a sort of big, stupid guy that can attack for the win if we need him to. 5 mana, 6/6 is really good stats, but what we're mostly interested here in is drawing the card, obviously, which we have many ways of doing. Tireless Tracker, really also awesome in this deck, but it's just a little too expensive for the budget deck. But we're putting an awful lot of lands into play, and that makes something like Tireless Tracker amazing, especially considering we get to draw a bunch of cards off of those clues. That's great, and Tireless Tracker himself can get big and win the game for us too. And Groundskeeper, fantastic in this deck too. I was playing a 3 of him, and I ended up playing 2 copies of Ultimate Price for some removal, but I ended up cutting those to make the deck do what it does a little bit easier, because what it wants to do is have Molten Vortex and a Groundskeeper out, and a Crawling Sensation if it's lucky, but it's good with Molten Vortex and just Groundskeeper out. Obviously, these 2 cards create a loop, which can just win you the game if you have, enough turns to make that win the game for you. But Groundskeeper's also good with things like Magmatic Insight and Fork in the Road, Vessel of Nascency, anything that dumps lands into your graveyard, I really like it with Magmatic Insight, as a matter of fact. So, Groundskeeper, draw 2 with Magmatic Insight, and then, pay 2 mana and put the card that you discarded right back into your hand after you get your 1/1 insect. There's just so many things that can happen all at one time in this deck. You know, if you have a Gitrog monster and a Molten Vortex and a Sensation out, it's like discard a card to Molten Vortex, do 2 to you, Crawling Sensation gets me an insect, I draw a card off the Gitrog monster, and then I get the land back with Groundskeeper. There's just so much that happens in this deck. Depending on how many different cards you have out, obviously. But almost any 2 cards that you can have out at any given time combo with one another. We're playing 26 lands in this deck. It is just very important that you have a fairly high land count in these decks, because you're going to want to draw all the lands that you can, because we're doing a lot with our lands, and we want an extra land in this deck, not only to have extra red sources so that we can activate the Molten Vortex, but so that we have a bunch of lands that we can discard to the Molten Vortex. A lot of lands that we can we can play an extra land with Gitrog Monster, another reason to have a lot of lands. We have to sacrifice lands to Monster, another reason to play a lot of lands. So very high land count is where you want to be in this deck. And Drownyard Temple, probably the most notable addition to this mana base here. Drownyard Temple just goes like perfectly in this deck. We're discarding a lot of lands, and although we do have a lot of ways of getting those lands back, Drownyard Temple has a built-in way of doing it, and can even function as ramp. And here's the sideboard for the competitive deck. A very expanded sideboard, considering we have access to more colors. We're mostly going to use that to play Duress, which is good against the decks that are good against us, mostly control decks and decks that rely on things like Collected Company, decks that rely on Planeswalkers, you know. Those decks can be pretty darn good against us, and Transgress and Duress both work pretty well against those. Also, ramp decks, Transgress works very, very well against those too, and they're very good against us. So, although we can't chump block, but Ulvenwald's going to rip all the cards off of our library before too long. So we got to worry about that. Natural State is good against Virulent Plague. That's mostly why it's in there. And that's about it. Honestly, there's not much more to talk about. We got some removal. I moved the ultimate prices to the board here. But again, fairly standard sideboard in these colors. And here's the power rankings for the competitive deck here. A final score of 61, and it's about $60 to build. So you're looking at a little more than $1 a point. Not much more, but about $1 a point here, which is not bad, actually. It's not bad at all. Like if it's a deck that scored 70 was $70, that would be a breakthrough, you know? That would be amazing. But this is, you know, still 61 can hang. It's not bad, especially if we are allowed to get set up. The longer the game goes, the better for us in both decks, but especially this competitive one, because in this one we put them on a definite clock with Molten Vortex. All the while, we're getting chump blockers with Crawling Sensation, so that in and of itself allows us to go a little bit longer with our Molten Vortex and maybe end up winning the game. It happens more than you might think. The deck looks fairly janky, but once it's got its pieces in a row, it can really do a lot of damage in just a couple of turns, because again, whenever you get rid of a land, a lot of different stuff is happening for you. That's all I've got for now, but shuffle this one up, proxy it up for yourself, build it, because to build both decks is like $70, and there's a bunch of crossover cards. So build these up, see how you like them, play them on X-Mage for all I care. Just play these decks, because I actually have a fair amount of faith, especially in the competitive deck. It might need more main deck removal depending on your local meta, but this deck has actually been, like I said, a lot more impressive than I thought it would be. It was just sort of a pet project at first. I didn't know how good it would be, but Molten Vortex, Crawling Sensation, and Groundskeeper just all work so well together. We've also got the Gitrog monster in this format. Tireless Tracker works well with all of the above mentioned cards. Just everything has synergy with everything else in the competitive deck. So just, don't take my word for it. I really want you to try it out and tell me how you feel. But what are we doing next time? Well, there's a lot of stuff I've got planned. Again, I do want to know what decks you want to see. I'm interested in that. But next time is either going to be the Mono Black Sacrifice deck, which should be fairly budgeted unless I include Kalidas, which probably has to be in it. But I'm also thinking about doing Green-White Humans, a deck that a lot of people want to see. I know I've got a few people in the comments screaming like, Green-White Humans, for like 3 weeks now. So if you want to see that, let me know in the comments. One of those 2 decks will be next. But that's all for now. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, do me a serious solid. Hit the like button. That's all you got to do. Just be like, click. That's it. You can also share the video if you want to go the extra mile. You can comment. Let me know how you felt about all of this. And then sub if you're new, because we got a lot of content coming up. Deck techs, top 10 lists, and Eldritch Moon spoilers be coming very, very soon here. So stick with us, and I'll see you guys next time. I'm Dev from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.